Welcome, everybody. It's great to see all your faces out there, and I am thrilled to have lots of you back for the third and final session of the CASTE Community Read. My name is Mike Wakeford, and I am Interim Executive Director of Muse Winston-Salem. At Muse Winston-Salem, our mission is to connect and enlarge the community through history, storytelling, and informed, balanced perspective that leads to acceptance, understanding, and belonging. And it's with that mission and those goals in mind that I welcome each of you here tonight, along with our guests, for the final of 3 evenings dedicated to a community exploration of Isabel Wilkerson's acclaimed treatment of race in America, CASTE, The Origins of Our Discontents. I want to again give major thanks to the co-sponsors of these programs, Wake Forest University, Bookmarks, and the UNC School of the Arts. I want to thank all of the guest scholars who have been part of this series that started with Barry Trachtenberg, continued with Rais Rahman, both from Wake Forest University and the Department of History. And tonight, of course, we have two new guests, and we'll meet them shortly. It is just really, really exciting to have had so many different folks involved in this initiative at so many different levels and such a varied group of contributors and participants from different institutions. So I want to quickly, on behalf of my friend Monique O'Connell, who is Department Chair of the Department of History at Wake Forest University, also express special thanks to Dean Michelle Gillespie and Associate Dean Eric Stottlemyre over in the College of Arts and Sciences. They were essential to helping us get the free books that I think helped build momentum for this initiative. And those books, I want to note, were made possible through funding received through Wake Forest University's Mellon One grant that supports projects like this, aimed at creating connections between the Winston-Salem community and Wake Forest students and students and faculty from Winston-Salem State, UNCG, and so on. So thanks so much for that. I want to give a special shout out to Muse Winston-Salem board member Lisa Blee, also faculty at Wake Forest, who played a really instrumental role in getting those books to the right folks all around town. So thanks for that. Before I introduce our moderator tonight and turn the event over to someone else, I want to just mention a couple quick things. Following this event, and I'll probably say this at the end too, but following this event, I hope you'll look in your email for 2 things. One is work, one is fun. One is will be a feedback survey. We would love to have, some of you have been really generous and offering some feedback along the way that we've really taken to heart and made changes along the way. This has been a learning experience for us, and it's been great to have your feedback and support along the way. So that will probably come to your email box in the next couple of days. And also, some of you, and including one of the audience members tonight, I think I saw Kathy Pounds roll on in here, and Kathy asked a question in the chat bar recently about would it be possible to get some reading recommendations from the different guest scholars who have been part of this event, if folks wanted to read additionally into any of the topics and themes that we've talked about. And the answer to that is yes, it is in process. All 5 of our guests, including moderator April Ruffin-Adams, have added a few titles to a list that combines both fiction and nonfiction, and we'll be putting that into legible form in the next couple of days as well, and we'll send it out to everybody. So hope that's a good resource for those of you who are not done with this topic or associated topics yet. And I think with that, I will simply say thanks again for being here. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. April Ruffin-Adams. You know her well now, but for those who might be here for the first time, I'll introduce her. Dr. April Ruffin-Adams is an instructor in the African American and African Diaspora program at UNC Greensboro, where she's taught since 2016. Her research interests include critical race theory, Black feminist theory, and educational equity. She's also a board member to our good fortune here at Muse Winston-Salem. So April, thank you for everything you've done to make this this series of evenings a success, and don't mess it up now.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Michael, for your introduction and for the opportunity to be in this wonderful event. And thank you to everyone who is joining us tonight. If this is your first time, we are so happy to have you. If you've been with us the whole time or even once before, welcome back. As you know, this is the third and final installment of the CASTE Community Book Read. Let me give you a quick recap of the previous sessions. First, we talked with Dr. Barry Trachtenberg about Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, and the role of casteism in Germany and the United States. If you remember, we talked about the differences in memorials in the two countries. In Germany, the victims of the Holocaust are remembered, and there is an intention around educating people about the atrocities that happened in an attempt to make the world a better place and make sure that never happens again. By contrast, in the United States, the losers of the Civil War are held in a place of honor and esteem, with memorials, statues, schools, and streets named after them across the country. While Black people, the formerly enslaved, have been constantly dehumanized and discriminated against in ways that the war claimed to rectify. In the second session, we spoke with Dr. Rais Rahman about Indian caste traditions and the American racial order. Dr. Rahman beautifully explained casteism in Indian culture and its roots in Hinduism. We also discussed the differences between two of India's prominent civil rights leaders, Gandhi and Ambedkar. Tonight, we'll end the series by discussing the impact of casteism and racism in the United States. We have two brilliant scholars, Anjan Basu and Armando Collins, and they'll bring together the themes of Wilkerson's book and connect the information we've learned in the first two sessions to think about how the historical and contemporary functions of caste manifest in the United States. So now let me tell you a little bit about our evening and our plans. If you've joined us before, you've been to breakout rooms. Well, we're gonna ditch the breakout rooms today. Instead, we're going to solicit questions from the audience. You can send those in the chat bar, and you'll have an opportunity, perhaps, to share your question or have it read to the group, whatever you're comfortable with. So at approximately at 7:45, we'll end our panel discussion and begin audience questions. As always, our goal for this session is to last about an hour and 15 minutes. It is now my pleasure to introduce our guests for the evening. Dr. Armando Collins holds a PhD in English rhetoric and composition with an emphasis in African American and African diaspora studies. He is currently a visiting assistant professor in African American and African Diaspora Studies and the department head of the Digital Media Commons in Jackson Library at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. His most recent work, The Media Assault on the Black Male, appears in the Handbook of Research on Black Males, which was released by Michigan State University Press in 2019. Mr. Anjan Basu is an academic advisor and lecturer at North Carolina A&T State University. He is also an instructor in African American Studies in the Liberal Studies Department. His scholarly focus is African American literature and post-colonial studies. He is committed to holding America to the standards of equality, equity, and equality. Welcome, Dr. Collins and Mr. Basu.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. So let's talk about the book some. All right. Wilkerson makes the case that caste and race are not the same. In chapter 1, she wrote, "Race is what we can see, the physical traits that have been given arbitrary meaning and become shorthand for who a person is. Caste is the power infrastructure that holds each group in its place. How do you view the differences between the two? And how do casteism and racism support each other?" I'm going to go with you first, Armando.
Caste, as Wilkerson characterizes it, which arguably may not align with everybody's definition of caste in human history. As she characterizes it, it is what we call in rhetoric an ethos, an overarching spirit or worldview that shows up in the cultural logic and very often the cultural artifacts of any civilization. In America, race is a part of our ethos. Mm-hmm. Caste is human inequality, as I read Wilkerson characterizing it. Race is a specific advent of that type of inequality. And it is very specific to the American moment. You do not get the idea of race as human categorization until you get the American moment, and you do not get it as violently pronounced until you get the American moment. Yes, there is class difference, there is status difference, there is ethnic difference, there is nationality difference. But this idea of race, especially the white-black binary of race, that was something created in the American moment to perpetuate the idea of America and Americanness. Many scholars would argue that this is a function of economics, but what the beauty of Wilkerson's work, which I agree with personally, is that the idea of race, that violent inequality as it manifests in the American moment, supersedes the idea of money, jobs, even class status. You do not get people lynching someone, cutting off their genitalia, boiling them for vitality purposes if you're going for money. There's no money in that. There is no economic gain in that. What Wilkerson is trying to do is create a cultural space to describe what is the ever-present reality for anyone who was born as a raced individual in America. And we all are. If you think of yourself as white, black, whatever, you have naturalized an unnatural idea. And that is what Wilkerson is trying to deconstruct. And ultimately, the work asks us to deconstruct that. She begins the work for us by breaking it down in digestible terms. Much of the content of the texts is almost secondhand knowledge to any Black person who feels life beyond their own individual experience. Yeah. We know this, but to Wilkerson's credit, she is articulating it for audiences who aren't us. And she does it for a swath of people, academics to regular people. And she has to, for good and bad, employ the cultural logics of other cultures across space and time. This is why she's bringing in Nazism and Indian caste. At times it gives a descriptive power, but at times it doesn't work. But it works to create a narrative that tells us intelligibly what is actually going on now and how deeply rooted it is in the logic of America. Armando. And for it to be deconstructed, you have to point to that story.
Armando.
Yes.
Let's give Anjan a chance to jump in. Let's see what he's got to say. Anjan. Is he muted?
Unmute.
There you go.
There you go.
I'm good.
Yes.
I know it was only like a second, but that second to reach for that mute button is a lot of pressure. I just want to say that officially for the record. To kind of piggyback off of Armando, when you take a look at how many spaces in our everyday lives that either race or maybe not its progenitor, but a co-conspirator to its genesis, if you will, these ethos that Armando was talking about, these worldviews, these perceptions, right? They are all based in faith, i.e., the very first one of the very first manifestations of caste, or the prevailing justifications for the caste system, was that it is a divine will thing, right? So God wanted me to be over everybody else. I believe it. I made all of you believe it. Now we believe it, and it is so, right? Caste is different than race. Cool. However, race takes these same faith-based ideas, right? And then also adds capitalism, education, healthcare. They base it on skin color, right? It manifests itself in private prison corporations in North Carolina have access to North Carolina third grade reading scores because they've got science that says if a third grade Black boy in North Carolina does not read a grade level, he's like 80% more likely to be in jail by 18. So we have corporations that are using educational reading scores to predict their business model, which is building prisons. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. These things, you toss a pebble into a pond, you have ripples, and it goes out in all directions and it touches all things. And that is what Wilkerson has really shown us, to me, in this text, is she has created the most complex Venn diagram ever. So no, caste and race are not the same things. And I'm not saying that America practices caste over race or class over race or any of those things, right? Those are either or binaries. Wilkerson has created an and both Venn diagram. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is the real power in her writing, and her choice of caste, ancient Indian caste. Well, not even ancient, really, just Indian and caste, Nazi Germany, and whiteness in America.
Excellent. So I want to ask you all then, if you think about that, and you think about, you see, you can feel what she wrote and you understand it. Of the 8 pillars that she discussed, did you have one that surprised or shocked you? Did it help you understand anything any better about how the country was built, how the possibility of caste being a real thing, like maybe we didn't think about this before? Did it shape you, those 8 pillars? I'm going to start with Anjan this time.
So the 8 pillars helped me out a lot because I've been studying race, and I've been studying how the rest of the world has had to react to the events of European colonization, right? So post-colonial studies, looking at African-American experience and studies, the 8 pillars of caste gave me a vocabulary to describe some very real parts of my personal life that I've never really had the words to describe. I've never looked at the things that I was personally taught about my racial identity in America and all that other good stuff in terms of systems of oppression, right? Because there's nothing not oppressive about the 8 pillars of caste. It's inherent, like that is the business model, right?
Mhm.
Someone's got to starve in order for me to eat.
Mhm.
And they just basically rolled that out. And so like when I look at the ideas of divine will, what does that really mean, right? So that's the spiritual foundation of what I believe. Heritability, what is it that what I'm being passed down from my parents, from my previous generation, and what I'm passing down to my next generation, right? Endogamy and the control of marriage and mating, who I have kids with, who I have a family with, purity versus pollution, the occupational hierarchy. I don't want to go through all of them. At the end of the day, when I've been confronted with ideas that I just couldn't figure out about America and race and whiteness and white supremacy and Black oppression and Black liberation and all these things, I run out of words to conceptualize some of these ideas because, to use Crenshaw, you know, they intersect so much, right?
That's right.
If you're standing at the intersection of Race Street and Gender Street, and you're standing right there, what street are you standing on? No one can really answer that question, right? It's an overlap.
Mhm.
These are what these 8 pillars have shown me. And it gives me a better tool by which to really critically self-examine where I actually stand.
Oh, that was wonderfully said, Anjan.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, wonderfully said. Armando, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, but hold on, I have to digest what Andrea just said. I got thug tears.
Sucks.
Appreciate you, Andrea. Like I said, all of her work clearly articulates in plain language a very complex issue that I've been studying professionally and personally for years. But the pillar that got me was the pillar 1, the divine will and the laws of nature. And the reason being is within American history, logic takes shape in human form on a trajectory. My good friend, the Reverend Dr. Earl Fisher, reminded me just recently that in reference to this, bad theology equals worse anthropology and even worse sociology.
Right. Yeah.
This is the trajectory of the racial narrative in the United States. It starts at an American moment, or when we start what we call the American moment. Well, those warm and fuzzy George Washington moments and colonials and teas and stuff. The cultural logic that was being implanted in that Burgundian society, that thing that was growing, was that human value was to be rated on this racial hierarchy. Race does not denote inequality. It does not denote a grouping of people and everybody is the same. The category and box that you get put into have very real material weight on the outcome and life chances of you as a citizen and member of a society. The range of activity you are allowed to engage in the American moment, being designated as white or Black, has material import from the moment that this United States thing is started. Don't believe me? Look at the history of passing. Those are life chances that people are engaging in. This isn't just, I want to be in with the cool kids. You can live or die. Conversely, there is a very well-documented history that, and we're doing it with the People Not Property project at UNCG, of white people being disinherited from their whiteness by being labeled as Black. If those categories are innocuous and innate to human nature, that doesn't happen. But over time, we see the formations of it happening. 1706, for instance. I'm not gonna bring slides. Anjan told me I can't bring slides, so I'm not gonna inundate you guys with slides, but I had slides, y'all. Anyway, 1706, Reverend Cotton Mathers. He writes a very popular book of citizenship instruction called The Negro Christianized. This is not a book about Black people for Black people. This is him instructing white people on how to engage Africanness. And what he does is construct Africanness as divinely willed servants of white people from Europe. He implores his white Christian brothers to accept Blacks as equals in the fellowship of Christ, because the Christian ethos is being given to them as a gift, but it can only be given on an axis of punishment or redemptive suffering. You got to go through some pain to get this. His words betray a racist logic that's rooted in the concept of race, creating a naturalized hierarchy of humanity. He says some very interesting things about it throughout the text, but one thing he says, I think that stood out to me that shows what Wilkerson is trying to get at, is that God said that white people are over Black people. He says, "It has come to pass that by the providence of God, without which there comes nothing to pass, that poor Negroes," keep in mind now, right now he's conflating poor and Negro, that ain't natural, "are cast under your government and protection." Black people are to be governed by white people eternally. "You take them into your families, you look on them as part of your possessions, their chattel, and you expect from them your service and a support that you give them, and perhaps maybe you can even create an increase for yourself and your possessions." This betrays the cultural logic of the United States before the United States moment. At this moment, we tend to think Black people were all slaves. The reason that you have legalized slavery is because there was a cross-section of free Black people, however they got free, at the moment you create the United States. So you have to legislate them out of citizenship. You legislate them out of citizenship by perpetuating this narrative of human value and conflating slave and free. Goes even deeper. By the time you get to the antebellum era, you have reverends. Remember, the church is the biggest organizational institution for information or the projection of cultural logic at this time. You get people like the Reverend Charles Colcott Jones, who publishes a very popular book in 1842 called The Religious Instruction of Negroes in the United States. He has to write this because there's a Christian clause that says, if you cannot enslave another Christian. How does America deal with that? After Christianizing their slaves? That rule don't count no more. Within this, if you look at this section of the Bible, there were slaves and you're supposed to have slaves. And he says, continuing on Cotton Mather's trajectory, because by now, like we're 200 years plus deep in this thing, and cultural logics have been rooted. Like, this is what we think we are as a people, because these people are now calling themselves American and are rooted to this land as natives. He says that the people of the United States, and what he means is white people only, indulge in prejudices in respect to the Negroes, both in favor of their advance and adverse to them. He's talking about the cultural logic of abolitionism versus slavery. He says, this phenomenon can be explained because, the variety of the human family and its subordination as classes in society is divine. It is a fact not to be disguised. This is pure cultural logic. We all know this. This is a fact. He's talking to other Christians. On the other hand, talking of African Americans, even though that they seem human, their ignorance, their vulgarity, their idleness, improvidence, irreligion, and vice are to be ascribed altogether to the position of their circumstances. Black people are slaves because they're slaves, and they're slaves because they're slaves. Like if they weren't, are they slaves because they're Black? It's a circular logic.
Right. Armando, so listen, where we are now, you've brought us through. So you have solidified for us the religious connections to caste and racism in the country. Yes?
Yes.
And so now let's talk about this present moment and what keeps the caste hierarchy in place for right now.
What I was alluding.
Armando,
Yes, ma'am.
you just talked a long time. I'm gonna let Mr. Anjan Basu talk a little bit.
Hurry up, Anjan.
Okay. Repeat the question, please. No, kidding.
Sure.
Oh, well, go ahead. Go ahead. Actually, yes.
What keeps the caste hierarchy in place today?
I think what keeps the caste hierarchy in place today is the very thing that you need to build the caste hierarchy in the first place. George Michael said it. You gotta have faith. This thing is real. I'll put it like this. There is a machine out there that spits out very real and material products, but that machine is built upon our ideas. That machine is made up of our ideas. You can pass your hand right through it. Casper the Friendly Ghost, if you will, right? You put, let's see if I can get this metaphor right. If you put faith on one side of a magnet and you put empirical science, or AKA fact, right? Like what was it called when they measured the bumps in people's heads?
Phrenology.
Phrenology, thank you. You know what I'm saying? This was a legitimate science back in the 1800s, right? Like you could go to Harvard and get a PhD in phrenology.
The anthropology phase I was talking about.
Right. So, because I mean, the 1800s is littered with bad anthropology, right? Out of Oxford and Yale and all those other places. So, if you can balance faith on one side and fact on the other side of the same magnet, you can put any old magnet underneath it, and now you have created a perpetual motion machine. And every time that magnet spins once in the air, one person is disenfranchised and another person gets a dollar bill. I hope this makes sense. I realize that was really, out there, but this is what I'm trying to say. Like, if you look at it, it's the friction that causes some type of change in our society from which someone profits from, right? White folks in America were not racially oppressive to Black folks because of science. They were oppressive to Black folks because it was profitable and their faith allowed it, right? You're going to build your businesses based on how you understand your faith. This is still a problem today, is it not? We have a lot of people in America that believe they're supposed to vote their conscience, not the issue. We hear this as regular GOP rhetoric, right? The anti-abortion, you know what I'm saying? Like I have to vote my conscience, and my conscience came from God. My faith and my facts are the same thing, and I'm cool with that. And that's the way America has operated. I would argue that's how it operates today as well.
I've been talking about this with Reverend, thinking about it, reading Reverend Barber, and he calls it religious heresy. It's and he won't call it Christianity, right? This religious heresy, it's a bad theology, right? Religiosity, anything other than, because the contention, right? What's put forward is this is Christianity, and my Christianity says that's what has done it all, right? The slaves need to submit to their masters, right? That's it, right? And so that there's been this justification, right? But that's a flawed theology, right? That's not necessarily what the religion says. Certainly not this atrocity that we've created in the United States, right?
Oh no, it's entirely flawed.
But
We're
it's
just
also
we're okay with it. I'm sorry.
the faith that you're talking about, Anjan, is also a projection of white supremacy into the area of religion.
That's right.
Which predates to my point, it predates the making of laws, the making of the rhetoric of science. Those become almost a reverse engineered form of justification for human behavior that has been enacted.
It's real easy to. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Avery.
No, you go ahead, please.
Oh, it's a
Okay,
lot
one last thing,
easier.
I know. To your point, if it's all about money, and I'm down. I know you're not saying it, but if money is at it, how do you boil people's genitals and make soup? Why would you go in there and personally persecute somebody to no economic advantage to yourself other than your ability to perform cruelness? I think that what has happened in the African-American experience as evidentiary experience cannot be fully accounted for with the idea that, oh, it's just white people trying to make some money. At one point in time, we was money.
It's not to privilege one over the other, right? But what I'm saying is, if you have a faith system that allows you to commit absolutely atrocious acts of inhumanity and barbarity for some 250 years straight, so it's not like I accidentally, killed somebody, right? I've been doing this for 250 years. I saw my great granddaddy rape a woman in front of me when I was 7 because it was life for them back then, right? I mean, I know that was graphic, but I'm sorry, I've got 12 years a slave running through my head right now. And that was a pretty big scene in that movie, right? Anyway.
But unfortunately, it's also real. So it's graphic and real.
Yeah. So these things affect people's upbringing like nothing that happened to Black folk in America, whether it be capitalistic exploitation, racial oppression, whatever, none of that. And this is to bring it back to Wilkerson, none of that was by accident. None of these sufferings are unfortunate byproducts of ideas gone awry. These things were done on purpose. They were done with intention. They did these things because they were looking at these other human beings and saying, when you can make the ideological trick to look at a brand new baby that just happens to be brown or Black or not white and say, screw him, he is an animal destined for labor on my behalf. You've already lost at least 85% of your God-given humanity.
I mean,
I could be fuzzy on the percentage though. I mean, I'm just saying.
Armando, we are at 7:41. Do y'all see that? We've already almost spent this time. I want to ask y'all though, one more question before we go. So you're going to have to keep this very tight.
Because I will Kendrick Lamar control verse this.
Thank you. Thank
You don't mean before we go, before we turn to questions.
Before we turn to questions.
Nobody hang up.
Nobody hang up, everybody stay before we go to, but before we end this portion of the program,
Yes.
I want to ask you, where do you all think you sit in this caste hierarchy? We've talked personally about, you know, the HBCU moment. We've talked about Greekdom and in the role of being Greek in Black society, Black elitism. So where do you all find yourselves in this caste hierarchy?
I would think if I'm following Wilkerson and what I believe the ultimate message of her book is, which is a call to action. My personal positionality, because we all have a position in life. We're all interconnected. Centrality. At this point in time, if you have voice and agency, especially as an African American in the United States, use all of it to what ends you have access to it. It was intentionally taken from us in the public sphere and to the point of it being taken away from us in the private sphere. Within this generation of people in humanity, to get to this next level of and the utopia I think Wilkerson is shooting towards, we're going to have to take up the full space of us, unapologetic, in reference to that dominant narrative, which is a narrative of subordination of anything not itself.
And where are you in the caste hierarchy?
I have the ability to take voice and agency for myself, as you guys have seen all night.
Yeah. John, where are you on the caste hierarchy?
So I was trying to figure that out because, you know, you definitely surprised me with this question. And I had never really thought about it, to be honest. So now I have to kind of think of my own privilege, if you will, right? In order to figure out, because it's the privilege that I have access to that determines where I'm at in the caste system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both my parents are from India. I am the first generation post-colonial son of the diaspora, right? My parents were alive when India got its independence. They knew they were in Calcutta when that happened, and the war that followed afterwards. And then I was born and raised in Wilson, North Carolina. Like, I don't know exactly how that happened, but there we go. And then I joined a Black fraternity, which is an interesting thing in itself. And I teach African American studies at a Black college. It's if you are not white and you are not Black, especially in the South, you have two options. You can drink from the semi-poisoned well of whiteness, or you can drink from the obviously poisoned well of Blackness, because both wells are owned by whiteness at the end of the day. Mm. The more I want to move up, the more I have to drink from the semi-poisoned well. That's the way it works. I now live in a place that has access to a golf course. That's not the way my parents necessarily raised me, right? So I have moved up the social ladder. I am part of the American dream right now. I drive a minivan. You know, I've got a brown picket fence and not a white one, right? But I've got 2 kids and the 2-car garage, and everything is awesome. And we go to Myrtle Beach once a year, and you know, we're almost but not quite drowning in credit card debt, but it's cool because that's apparently American, right? But there's a lot of people out there who have it a lot worse than I do, right? Both white and Black. So this racialized caste, I don't really understand the rules anymore. Mm. I got to be honest with you, because once you get to a particular point, it's like one of my favorite rappers once said, Fonte Coleman, he said, you know that the narrator's a liar, but you just love the story. And that is my relationship with all of America and race and caste and social mobility hierarchies and all that stuff. I'm lost, but I'm okay. So that's my articulation within the social hierarchy stands.
All right. Okay. Now, do you all want to add? No, we're not going to add. Michael,
Right.
Yeah.
do you have any questions from?
Yeah, we have a lot. No, we have a lot of incredible questions coming in, and I'm going to try to move through them in a useful way. But yeah, there's great questions. I also want to tell Armando that immediately upon announcing that you weren't going to show your slides, we got requests in the chat saying, "Why isn't he showing the slides? And can he share them later?" So I just want to say,
Somebody appreciates me.
you shouldn't have been peer pressured into not using your slides. Yeah, so y'all, I mean, a huge sort of swell of interest has followed in the discussion of religion. I'm just gonna actually read a cluster of 3 questions. I'll just read them aloud, and then let y'all, if you want to take that conversation a little further, please do. The first one, and I'm sorry I didn't keep track of the names these were coming from, but the first was, how do you explain the inconsistency between faith and their actions when it becomes personal? The owner is willing to boil human parts to instill fear. The owner who is willing to boil humans to instill fear is deemed to be worth the sacrifice. I'm not sure if I'm reading that accurately. Then somebody else said, various forms of Christian faiths and institutions have existed in the United States since its inception. Did all the various Christian faiths and institutions create and support the perception of a divine will to support the existence of slavery and racism, or has it been relative to some? And if so, which religions? And then somebody else followed with, how can you argue with sacred texts that purport these bases for caste and racism? The argument seems infallible in the hands of fanatics. I may not be inflecting everybody's comments or questions correctly, but I just offer those to y'all as a jumping off point.
Well, what I was trying to get at is that there is an unevenness in Christianity in terms of practice. And it does show up denominationally, it does show up geographically, and it does show up historically. There are atrocities that have been enacted upon other human beings from all denominations, arguably, but every denomination and every church member or faith believer in that particular faith has not acted on that. In terms of how people can use it as a socialization process, there's a very good article written by Dr. Sally Ann Ferguson, which talks about Christianity and violence, and uses and draws a parallel between the story of Jesus and his persecution, that violent scapegoating that happens with his blood and body, being a metaphor, an analogy for what is taking place in the American moment with African Americans. And I would extend her criticism to say that it wasn't just happening back then, it is happening now. Mm-hmm. We are the metaphorical sacrificial lambs that are being put on the chopping block for the salvation and recognition of humanity for others. Happens all the time.
So the Black body is performative, like it's a vessel for white salvation, if you will.
When you create,
but you gotta kill it. You gotta. It's like throwing the virgin into the volcano, right?
We are the virginistic. Yes.
There we go. I just want to.
But in order to do that, you have to create that narrative line. Yes. Yeah.
I would say to the question, I think what needs to change is that there might need to be an ideological shift in how we see religion. Like religions are both ancient and in the dead, but they're also in the live, right? So what if we maybe treated the Bible as a living document and I don't know, made some changes with the same authority as King James, right? So like Wilkerson in her text says that, there was a movement of Dalits, the untouchables, that said Hinduism itself, since casteism comes from Hinduism, from the holy texts, then we should do away with Hinduism altogether. Scrap it, let's make a new religion. That sounds very extreme if you're a religious person, right? I'm saying it might. I mean, and I'm not a religious person by any stretch, and I'm not saying this to criticize anyone's faith. But it's some 2,000 years later. It might be time to maybe revisit some of the more harmful aspects of the things that we believe and practice, especially when all of us are supposed to be centered on love and sacrifice, not for ourselves, but for others, right? That would change up race and caste and faith and oppression and all those type things, right? We might need to let go of certain things like, I don't know, is that, never, I feel like I'm rambling and
In terms of African-American religiosity, especially as it's been practiced in formal spaces, that project has already been begun. Read James Cone. The moreover to the, and that was the part of the question I forgot. The whole sacred text thing, the Bible wasn't written when it was written as a sacred coherent text. It was a bunch of different texts pieced together, and the idea of sacredness was, again, human advent instilled on this amalgamation of stories to create a coherent story that justifies the overarching narrative of a society and how it behaves. Don't blame the Bible, blame the people who are reading the Bible and using
There
the Bible.
we go.
There you go.
That's what we should have said like 15 minutes ago, right?
I had to get to it. Y'all see
I
how
get there.
long I did?
Let me ask y'all another question. I'm gonna actually, this is my first opportunity to call on somebody who says they're willing to speak it out loud. I'm gonna unmute Zoe Mark. I'm gonna just throw a word in. Zoe's a former student, and Zoe, you have a really interesting question. I think I just unmuted you, so welcome.
Yeah, so I was wondering, so at the beginning when you talked about the Venn diagram and then the way that racism has become mechanized, it made me think about the way computer programming and like the languages like Java and Python are inherently racist because the bias that created them make it so like the person who wrote them doesn't know how to be unbiased in the language that they're writing. And then you talked about, wait, sorry, I wrote it down and then I lost it. So the computer language itself cannot be made to be unbiased because the creator doesn't know how to write it that way. So if you extend that metaphor, do you think that there's a way to operate outside of that language? And with that last question, you asked how you identify within the system. And do you think there's a way to operate outside of it without causing harm by erasing people's lived experiences?
Man, I wish Armando had said all those things before. All right, so here we go. So great questions. Number one. All right, so to the first question, the Venn diagram, right? Can you repeat just the question itself? Because the second question caught me off guard.
Yeah, I guess for the first part, I was just asking, yeah, I don't know what my first question was.
All right, so it was really good though. I want to remember it.
Wow, coding,
Well,
right?
it's just Zoe, when you wrote it, you said when you talked about the Venn diagram that Wilkerson sets up, the way that racism has become mechanized, it made me think about the idea that computer programming can be inherently racist.
Yes. So there's a transnational feminist by the name of Rebecca Dingo, right? And she uses this idea called transcoding. Okay. And now in computer science, if I understand it correctly, and I'm a literature guy, so take that for what it's worth. Transcoding is like, let's say if I write or create an app, I have to make sure that that app is transcoded properly so it will operate on both Apples and Windows without losing efficiency or efficacy or any of that jazz, right? She says that when it comes to the idea of Western capitalism and democracy across the globe right now, What Western democracy does is it takes the language of the oppressed, right? Keeps it and makes it their own, and then repackages it in the form of policy that sounds like it's liberation to the oppressed, but is actually doing the furthering the work of the pre-existing oppressive structure. Does that make sense, Zoe? You got that? Okay. So if we look at it from that perspective, right? So there's even so then look at this as a machine, an internal combustion car, right? Internal combustion engine. You've got the cylinder, piston, it's got a cap. The piston comes up, which creates pressure. You insert a small amount of oxygen and a little bit of a spark, added with the pressure, that creates a small explosion. The piston drives back down. Pistons are going back and forth. That's what moves your car, right? An internal combustion engine. So there has to be conflict. There's some type of violence present in order to keep the engine running, right? Black folks in America have been the fuel for our car, right? There's a reason why all cars are given Americana names, right? Grand Voyager. Hey, you know what I'm saying? Getting with a little jazz hand. And that's the point though. So if the system is based upon conflict, then in our Venn diagram, we're not looking at similarities to overlap. Well, really what we're looking for is how far does the blood splatter? See what I'm saying? It's looking for CSI. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, thank you for that. Let me put another question out. This is the question kind of from a different angle, I think, but interested to have y'all respond to it. This is a question that came in actually through the online forum, and it reads: are you receiving feedback from others that the tenor of the book is strident and unrelenting? I feel assaulted in reading this book. Every point is made so forcefully that I doubt the author's reasoning. The readers of this book don't need to be convinced that the power balance is wrong. Interested how either of you or April would respond to that.
I think my face has the most skepticism in it based on the reaction. How are you strident and unrelenting means that the person who was reading it felt, and I do not mean to read into this person's life, abused. But the tone and tenor of the text is designed to be abusive to a very specific worldview. The person who said that may have issues or be invested in the worldview that is under assault, because she is very direct and very repetitive about who the target audience is and who the outgroup is. But within the form of this book, how abusive can that be vis-a-vis the subject matter that it is talking about and the lived experiences of the people that are being talked about? You feeling abused reading a book in the comfort of your home cannot be more abusive than being a member of a caste or being Black or being in a concentration camp. Would be my response. Don't know that person, don't want to attack that person, but that is a very odd comment to me as a scholar of literature. That is a person who, and it happens all the time. You run into a roadblock in a book. It becomes challenging to you not because of the verbiage or the premise, it's just the content is overwhelming. But that usually has more to do with the person who is experiencing the individual work than it has to do with the author's ability to communicate or convey ideas in the format of a book, would be my response.
To piggyback, it's not the book's fault. It's not the author's fault. It's your lived experience's fault that you feel the way that you feel.
Fair enough. Thank you. I think that's really useful to hear how you respond to that. Okay, I'm going to call on somebody else if she's willing. Let me Oh, it looks like maybe that person is I would say is Anna Goodman in the room. She was earlier, but she's not now. So okay, so I'm gonna skip that. Let's see, another one. This is from Diana Gray, and Diana, I'm happy to unmute you and let you ask a question. You're always full of good questions. Diana, I just unmuted you. Would you like to ask one of the questions you submitted?
Sure, I'd be willing to if I can find it on the list here. So I guess
I can put it in the chat bar for you if you want to want to script. You want me to do that? Here we go. Let's see. Where did I? Yeah, here we go.
I find it.
Okay.
I just wondered if you wanted to comment on the fact that the aspects that we've been talking about, racism, when I'm in the chat rooms and stuff, there seems to be a muddling of individual behaviors versus a systemic system that creates the way that people as a group are treated and oppressed by a class of people. And so earlier, one of you just kind of dismissed the idea that being cruel and evil to someone wouldn't necessarily be economically productive. But if it helps to maintain a system of terrorism that maintains this economic system and social system to keep people downtrodden, terrorized, and away from any of the advantages of society, then the individual behavior is really part of the whole systemic thing that creates this issue. And so it seems to me that if we want to even begin looking at addressing these issues, we need to look at this system that is so pervasive in every way, and we don't really recognize all the ways that it is acting, and that we are benefiting from it as white people. We don't even realize that.
Let's let them respond.
Right.
Thank you, Diana.
Sure.
Well, in no way do I dismiss the systemic nature of racism. And in fact, I think we are talking about the same thing. You cannot talk about the systemic culture of America or the systemic practices of America without talking about the cumulative effect of individual atomized behaviors. And those behaviors is what I'm saying is, before we get to this corporate culture that is creating these systems and these institutions, there is something that takes place in the individual where they engage as an individual into a collective. And there is a narrative of collectivity that people are subscribing to and ascribing to, that I think Wilkerson is also at least alluding to exists, that we're tapping into to create the systemic culture. While I do not agree, and I'll stand on it, that it's all about economics, there are economic effects, there are political effects. I don't disagree with that at all. But there is a cultural logic, a human impulse that does not show up in every human being that has to be addressed before you start to get into those institutionalized realms. And I mean, hopefully we do it all at the same time, because it does need to be dismantled and privilege does need to be interrogated. But you can't legislate it away. We've tried. It got legislated into existence because it was there. You don't start saying blacks and whites can't marry and have sex unless blacks and whites are marrying and having sex. And somebody got a problem with it.
So systems, right? You have the individual, you have the group, and you have the more institutional systems, right? Each of these is a system. And I think this is one of the things that I grappled with in the book, since I'm jumping in and ahead of Anjan. I think I grappled with it a little bit because, she talks about caste being the structure and race being the skin. This is the bones, caste is the bones, and race is the skin. And she talked about the house. But I felt like at the end, Wilkerson discussed the call to action from a very personal standpoint, right? So she talked about these really institutional concepts, but then she brought it back to some really like radical empathy and, very personal. But I think when you consider the systems, these are all working together, and that goes back to Anjan's Venn diagram, right? It's just all these things layered on top. So I don't think that one happens without the other. It's the people who are going to change the institutions, right? So we've got to get enough people together to collaborate so that we can structure some things so that we can do a remodel on the house that she's talking about here. Not a remodel, almost a rebuild on this house that she's been talking about here. Anjan?
It's like, to go back to my car analogy as America, right? Actually, let me take it one step further. The space shuttle. There are 1,000 different systems in the space shuttle, right? So like the air is a separate system from, I don't know, the plumbing, the sewage, right? You don't mix your air and your sewage lines. There's 2 different people that are in charge of these 2 separate systems. But if either one of these systems goes wrong in the space shuttle, everybody's going to die. Does that make sense? Like if that's the system, like all of these systems seem separate, but they are all part of the same overall contraption, right? They all work with each other. And they also all work independently at the same time. And that's the beautiful thing about race and caste, because once you put faith into it, any illogic will do. And now we've moved into the Sound of Music. And how do you pin down a cloud like Maria? Right?
I think that's what Wilkerson is saying in this.
Right. And so therefore,
cross-cultural.
It takes personal, critical self-examination to figure out the system you exist in,
That's right,
or place within it,
right,
and what you do to replicate the very worst of all the systems that you inhabit.
That's right.
And once you answer those questions, then you make corrective, what did Armando say? Individual atomized behavioral change.
Atomized behavior.
Right? You make those changes within yourself. You weave it in. For every character that you find missing, you weave it in. And then we all become better human beings, and people aren't necessarily oppressed based on something as stupid and arbitrary as race or sexuality or gender or economic class or whatever, right? We can just all choose to be better human beings, but that's the hard part.
Hey, April, with your permission, let me voice another little cluster of questions. I'll just put them all together and let y'all respond, because I think these all sort of belong together in a cluster that probably will take us toward the end of the night. First, props to Anjan for a Sound of Music reference. That gets the School of the Arts crowd going. So well done. There's a set of questions that have come in that are all aiming in the direction of, okay, what now? And they want to hear from y'all about your take on a question that is on everybody's mind, which is what are we going to do next? And they come from different angles, but I'm just going to give voice to them. Anna Goodman had posed a question online about something very specific and about philanthropy, and I'll just share the end of her question about how do we, it made the observation that some of our giving practices and charitable practices might sometimes actually be more in the service of maintaining the status quo than changing it. And the tail end of her question I'll just put out for consideration is, how do we ensure that our charitable volunteer activities are caste busting, not caste preserving? And how do we demand this of the nonprofits we support? That question is more specific than those that follow. Here's a question. Please pose this question to the group, this person wrote. I'm interested in hearing from others and not speaking for myself. I'd like to know what dominant caste readers of Wilkerson's writing, who have grown up in the South and are just now becoming aware or conscious, are going to do with their new feelings of discomfort and awareness. Another person wrote, this is the best discussion yet. This is real. Now let's please bring it home to North Carolina and Winston-Salem. Let's address our history as a town. What do we need to know as we move forward? Give us the good, the bad, and the ugly, not in that particular order. And then finally, I'm gonna call on Kathy Pounds, who asked a question in a similar vein, but with a reference to the book, which I always privilege. So Kathy, if you're unmuted, go ahead and ask that question, and then y'all can respond to these as a group.
Well, it's related to this, discussion we've just had, but on 383, Wilkerson's talks about Nazi Germany and says that they dismantled their caste system. And so I wanted to follow up with, should it be done by working on the systemic structural racism like Kendi talks about, being an anti-racist, but specifically what should be done locally or in the state? For instance, what groups are already active and knowledgeable about particular areas, but need volunteers, need voices speaking up for them or funding them? So sort of what's established so not everybody's trying to start from scratch.
Well, I'm going to start. I'm going to let her, because I have a feeling I know what Armando's going to say. So I'm going to take it in a different direction. I'm going to tell you a quick little story to make my point. So both of my parents, like I said, I'm Indian. Both my parents are from India, Calcutta. I pledged Alpha Phi Alpha, historically Black Greek organization. I've now been in the fraternity and active in my fraternity for 21 years, because in Black Greek letter organizations, these are lifetime commitments, right? And so I've had the conversation with my brothers that are by far Black, right? Like, I've yet to meet another Indian Alpha at all. So I've had this conversation though. As we're moving in, in 2020, we have more guys that are trying to join our fraternity that are not Black, right? And so I have a charge but it's the Black brothers that will be making these decisions as to whether or not to let them in or not. I say to every not Black brother of my fraternity, if you are not pro-Black in your not Black spaces, then you should not be granted admission into my fraternity. That is what, if this book, if me and Armando and April and everybody talking has put any type of fire in your belly, that is what you do. You are intentionally pro-Black, because pro-Black does not mean the same thing as pro-white, right? Pro-white has a 244-year legacy officially in this country of being violent. Let's try being pro-Black. And if you want to, you can incorporate your own philosophies. Judith Butler is a great place to start, right? As far as, feminist theory is concerned, precarity and vulnerability. Go forth and spread the word. It's actually good news, right? It's really good news for all human beings in America to love each other a little bit better. Go out here into your own circles, build your square, and remove to be moved from it, right? Refuse to be moved from it. That is what we need you guys to do. That is what being an ally and an advocate for something beautiful needs to look like.
Mm.
There you go.
To the question about philanthropy, although those giving don't necessarily control how the funds are going to be dispersed, working in that area in my own career path, I know that the donor very often has sway over the money and how it is enacted programmatically. For instance, donor just gave us at UNCG $6 grand to create a public-facing, student-centered EDI project. They didn't tell us what we could do with it, but they shaped what it can be earmarked for. And that happens more often than you would like to know, or than you may think in institutions. There are places you can just give money to blindly, anonymously, and it's going to go to the mission. But if that's the case and you're giving your money to that, be very strategic on what missions you support. And these nonprofits are very small in most cases. You can find out what the mission is and ask, hey, if I, can you guys do this? Your dollar does mean something. That is a vote. Moreover, to the point of what we do now in our individual spaces, back to what April was getting at, we each have our own space, our own position. What am I going to do? What are you going to do? I wouldn't say that there is an overarching best approach that fits everyone. However, what Wilkerson has started is what we should continue to engage with after we leave this text, which is interrogating the narratives that shape us and figuring out how those narratives or the things that we hold on to as our assumptive, normative values fuel inequality, and what we can do in our individual positions with what we do to counteract that in our behaviors. Mm-hmm. The idea of white privilege is very real, but not all white people have the same privilege and the same access to power over others and their own lives as everyone else. How does this system of white supremacy put you in position, and what are you going to do to deconstruct it? I think that is the takeaway from Wilkerson that we should all try to counteract. There is a system of inequality in place. We all play a piece in it. We're all like little microcosms of the macro structure. Mm-hmm. What can you do to break it down?
Let me throw one more question out into the mix, because this is a question from Linda Dark, and Linda's question gets asked. So here it comes. Linda asked, was interested in hearing from y'all about just how you're feeling basically about the persistence of prejudice and bias and its effect on our democracy. There's a lot of talk today about whether our democracy is safe or not. And with the, given what we've read in this book and what you all have expounded on tonight, what's the fate of democracy in the presence of all of this prejudice, and yeah, how are you seeing the road ahead?
I would say, Ms. Linda, that what we're seeing now is the reality of the United States. I don't think that this is some abnormal one-off. It is the United States showing you its true colors. So I just would say, Yeah, I don't know how what I would say. Are we safe? Is our democracy safe? This is our government, our society in the United States, acting in the way that it was always meant to act, in its most vicious and most polarizing. This is how our nation was built. And I think the book, one of the things the book does, we've talked about this, is it brings everybody to the same point, right? It gets us all to that point where we can have this conversation, where we can say, look, after we've read this book, we can see that this democracy that we have said that was so perfect is quite imperfect, and has been since even before it was documented, right? Before we had the Constitution, right? We start in the 1600s, solidifying the torture, the terrorism, the discrimination, the dehumanization of Black people, and really the extermination of Native Americans, right? So we do all of these things at once. That is the reality of the United States to me. So what I think that this moment does for us is say, okay, let's change what we can about the caste, right? You know, in the book she says caste is what is a state of mind. That's what Ambedkar said, right? Caste is a state of mind. It's not the walls. It's not we can't legislate it away. We are unable to do that. So this system is working exactly the way it was designed to work. So hopefully we can do something to change it. And this will bring our attention to the need for change in the future.
Thanks, April.
I'm kind of concerned about the contemporary moment, to be totally honest. We are at a moment where race is still at the forefront.
Yeah.
We have completely, as a culture, publicly, willfully rejected the idea of becoming a post-racial society.
Mm-hmm.
So much to the point where we are again at a point where white people are willing to fight and kill other white people over the issue of what they're going to do with Black people and the positionality of Black people in the United States. That's really where we're at. Kyle Rittenhouse is enacting the defense of whiteness against race traitors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what that is.
Mm-hmm.
When you see those people in Charlottesville, that's what that is.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, I just came back from Texas. Nobody wants to be in Arlington, Texas, and is trying to take that way of life from those people. However, that place is totally red, totally trumped out with guns, saying somebody, with their cultural logic, somebody is trying to take my Americanness from me. They're willing to kill and die for that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a perceived enemy based on the cultural logic that is inherent to the structure of everything that set it in motion. That has to be contended with, or we're going to keep getting those moments. There ain't no Black people in Kenosha, Wisconsin. What is Kyle Rittenhouse going to defend?
Property. The Phillips 66, man, it's valuable.
He killed other white
I
people.
take it in a slightly different direction.
Go ahead.
I would argue that there's never been a democracy. There's only been a lie of democracy. And whether or not you chose to believe in that lie will dictate how threatened you feel today.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's never really been about the people, right? It's never been about us. It's never been about the everyday Main Street American that is touted so favorably and so often in every type of narrative about Americana. It's never been about him. He is tap dancing. He's the monkey turning the grinder. You understand? Like, and you can take monkey however you want to in this case. because it's multifaceted as far as Americana goes and metaphors go, right? It's never really, every time I go vote and I put my little I voted sticker on and I take my little selfie and I put it on Facebook and my Twitter and my Instagram and my Snapchat and my all the other stuffs, right? And everyone's like, you're a good American. I hope that Zoom is doing my facial expression justice right now, because I don't believe a word of it. As Maya Angelou said, you don't judge a person on their word, you judge them by their actions. When they show you who they are, you believe them. All three of us as African-American studies scholars or African-American scholars, if we take 1619 to be the beginning point of Black American history on this continent, then we've got evidence, written, documented, evidence that you cannot refute. This is straight from the horse's mouth, from 1619 to going on to 2021. But us three are still the ones sitting out here trying to damn persuade other people that this is a problem. I'm the Black radical screaming in the wilderness, right? And I'm not even Black. This is a problem, folks. Right? This is a legitimate problem because it is fact-based and it is fact-based. It is faith-based and fact-based at the same time. How do any of us play by those rules?
Hey, so I'm about to give April the last word of the night, and when I give it over to her, she can take this all the way to midnight if she wants. But but the last word from me is that it's coming up on 8:30, and I think we're about to draw the evening to a close. I want to give just a special thank you here at the end of 3 evenings of discussion. I think tonight was a real highlight. I apologize for any questions I didn't get to. There will be follow-up with reading list and a feedback survey. I want to obviously thank Anjan and Armando tonight, and I want to especially thank April Ruffin-Adams for doing incredible work moderating all three of these sessions. We were talking about philanthropy a moment ago, and at the risk of being really, really cheesy, speaking of donations, if anybody was moved to drop a dime in the Muse Winston-Salem coffers to help us continue to do programs like this, and we sure do want to do that, feel free to click through that link, and it'll take you where you need to be. But I'm thrilled. I think that this is all told. I think we hit somewhere around the 600 mark in terms of attendance over the course of 3 nights of this series. That is a huge. I think that's a huge achievement. I hope you all have enjoyed it, whether you were here for 1 or 3. Thanks again, April, and you get the last word tonight. When you say good night, we all do.
All right. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. This has been wonderful, and I am so thankful that Anjan only cussed 1 time, and this has been a wonderful night, and I am so grateful to Anjan and Armando for sharing, and I really hope that people will take the book and pass it on. Maybe that's one way that we can, contribute to the changes that we need to see. But I am really, really just thankful, and I hope you all enjoyed it. And make sure you fill out the survey so we can know what to do if we're going to ever do this again, improve. Good night. Good night.
Bye, everybody.